Our tale begins with the chaos and promise of the French Revolution, when the people of France rose up, toppling the Ancien Régime and sending its representatives to the guillotine. This bold experiment in democracy would soon be overshadowed by the meteoric rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who ushered in the era of the First French Empire. But Napoleon's fall was merely the prelude to a new chapter in France's ongoing quest for stability and modernity. As the empire crumbled, the monarchy was briefly revived, only to be short-lived. The Second Republic flickered with hopes of democracy before being eclipsed by the ambitions of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, who declared himself emperor, setting the stage for the Second French Empire. Yet, history was far from finished with its dramatic twists. The collapse of the empire, following defeat against Prussia, gave rise to the Third Republic, a period marked by both triumphs and tribulations, guiding France through the stormy seas of industrialization and imperialism. The Third Republic endured for 70 years before it was overwhelmed by the forces of Nazi Germany. The end of World War II allowed for the creation of the Fourth Republic, a time of reconstruction and renewal, but also of political fragility and colonial strife. As the Fourth Republic faltered, an old figure emerged from the desert, Charles de Gaulle, who would lay the foundations for the Fifth Republic, a regime characterized by stability and a renewed sense of national pride. Today, we will traverse the peaks and valleys of these five republics, each reflecting France's evolving spirit and struggles. From revolutionary fervor to imperial ambition, from the trials of war to the triumphs of modern democracy, each republic has contributed to the rich mosaic of France as we know it today. Join us as we unravel the dramatic narrative of the five French republics, where every chapter is a tale of resilience and reinvention. Prepare to be captivated by a story as rich and complex as France itself. Welcome to Lafayette We Are Here, the French history podcast by a Frenchman. I am your host, Emmanuel Dubois, and today we are diving into a fascinating topic, the history of the five French republics. To many outsiders, especially Americans, this might seem puzzling. Why did France experience five different republics while the United States, during the same period, maintained a single form of government with only constitutional amendments? This question merits exploration, and we'll delve into it today. Since 1789, France has seen 12 different forms of government. To give you a quick rundown, we've had the monarchy, the First Republic, the Consulate, the Empire, the Restoration Monarchy, the July Monarchy, the Second Republic, the Second Empire, the Third Republic, the Vichy regime, the Fourth Republic, and the Fifth Republic. While some changes were more dramatic than others, the overall picture can seem like a complex French mess. In this episode, our focus will be on the five French republics. We will explore how each one came about, their unique characteristics, and their eventual downfalls. In future episodes, I will cover the other regimes that have shaped France's history. For now, I encourage you to listen to my previous episodes on the French Revolution, Napoleon Bonaparte, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I, and Charles de Gaulle for additional context. Keep in mind that I will go very fast over big stretches of time to cover the different republics. This is not an in-depth analysis. Listening to my episodes, focusing on the different time periods covered here, will greatly help. as I want you to get an idea of how these republican regimes worked, not sum up everything that happened while they were in place. So, buckle up as we jump all the way back to 1789 and the days of the French Revolution. I won't go back to the origins of the Revolution. Please listen to my dedicated episode for that. We'll focus on how the monarchy was abolished and the Republic chosen as France's new form of government. I will, however, draw some small parts of that episode to provide context. Contrary to a popular belief, the French king was not guillotined right after the beginning of the Revolution in 1789. The French people actually wanted a constitutional monarchy, not a republic, at least at first. They believed in the figure of the king and wanted to make it work, but in a new way. The first step towards this was the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, promulgated by the National Constituent Assembly in August 1789. Men like Lafayette or the Abbé Sieyès took part in writing it. It set the new reality for France. The old days of absolute monarchy were definitely over, but no one knew yet what would replace them. So for a time, France tried to make constitutional monarchy work, with Louis XVI remaining as king. Many things happened between 1789 and 1791 that undermined the whole endeavor. But the last straw is when Louis and the royal family decide to flee France on June the 20th, 1791. Louis flees during the night along with his family, but he is recognized on the road and arrested at Varennes. That's why the event is known as the Flight to Varennes. Even though the king was not heading for Varennes, he was just passing through. He's brought back to Paris on June 25th. Louis and the monarchy were in a very, very bad place after that. The revolutionaries tried to work with Louis a bit longer, and the Constituent Assembly adopts its first constitution on September 3rd, 1791. The king swears his oath to uphold it on September 14th. He even has the right to veto propositions of laws if he doesn't like them. The assembly becomes the Legislative Assembly. Louis is actually playing for time. The revolutionary government entertains very bad relations with foreign powers, and the king knows this. On April 20th, France declares war on Austria. The latter is soon joined by its ally Prussia to fight their now common enemy. Many European powers will join this war, known as the War of the First Coalition, trying to undo the revolution. The French revolutionary armies will eventually triumph, even though the first months are catastrophic for the French forces. Louis was expecting the coalition to invade France and to restore the old regime. This did not happen. During the following months of 1792, the power struggle between Louis XVI and the Assembly keeps going. The king actually wants his country to lose the war, while the government wants to win it, and, at the same time, to eradicate inside anti-revolutionary agents. On June 20th, a manifestation transforms into a riot, and the mob storms the Tuileries Palace, killing the royal guards. Louis XVI holds firm and is spared, but not for much longer. The Parisian people keeps protesting and rioting against the king and his family, perceived as traitors and dictators. This is known as the Commune de Paris. The Assembly fears that this could spiral out of control, so, to calm things down, they imprison the king and his family on August the 10th. He is also suspended and cannot interfere with the government anymore. The Commune has put the last nail in the monarchy's coffin. Louis XVI won't ever exercise any power again. On September 21st, the National Convention abolishes the monarchy, and the next day it establishes the French Republic. it also adopts a new calendar based on the birth of the Republic. So this was year 1 of the new Republican calendar, with a 10-base month and week system. Speaking of the calendar, the French Republic faced a unique challenge to choose a way to represent itself. Formerly, money and official documents showed the face of the king as the head of state. But what now? No man could represent the Republic or France all by himself. The whole point was to get rid of such an idea. From this interrogation, the French deputies chose to use the portrait of a woman wearing a Phrygian hat, another revolutionary symbol. That woman, who still represents the French Republic today, was named Marianne. Her name comes from Spanish philosopher Juan de Mariana, who had written about natural rights and who had a great influence on the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen. Today, she also embodies the ideas of liberty and of fighting abusing power. So, the king is now gone. France had just ended a regime that had lasted 1,000 years. It had adopted a republic, a form of governance dating back to the antiquity. It comes from the Latin res publica, literally meaning public affair or public matter, indicating that governance and power reside with the public, not with a king. Many philosophers had written treatises and books about what a republic is and means, but the French were of course most influenced by the philosophes of the Lumière, the French Enlightenment. Listen to our August 2022 episode on this subject if you want to find out all about it. But pertaining to the idea of a republic, I think Jean-Jacques Rousseau gives the most explicit analysis in his social contract when he writes, quote, "Every state governed by laws, regardless of the form of administration it may have. For only then does the public interest govern and the public matter become something. All legitimate government is republican." End quote. Hence, if a government serves the public, it is a republic, no matter the particularities. It implies that other forms of governments, monarchies, for example, do not serve the public by their very nature. The French also clearly echoed the Roman Republic, which existed before the Roman Empire. They saw it as an ideal form of government, at least trying to be so. We all know the failings of the Roman Republic and the subsequent empire, but we can understand the idea here. A republic, in theory, is the only form of government capable of serving the people and not only a chosen elite. Any monarchy, even a constitutional monarchy, has some sort of hereditary system creating inequalities. A republic does not have that problem, at least in theory. It's an utopian view, but revolutions are not built on pragmatism, are they? The point is to replace the current state of affairs by something radically better in the view of the revolutionaries. Well, a republic made perfect sense to the French revolutionaries in 1792. What will become the First French Republic had a very, very rough start. The country was at war with basically every European monarchy with an army, and it was facing famines. France executed its former king in January 1793, which was not a popular move abroad, and the Republic lacked legitimacy in the eyes of many French people. The First Republic was governed by the National Convention. It was an unicameralism regime, as it had only one house. By comparison, most modern republics have two houses, an upper and a lower. The idea is to counterbalance the power of the legislative body. The National Convention was unchecked in that regard. It was elected by universal male suffrage and met in the Salle du Manège at the Tuileries Palace in Paris. In that system, only men over the age of 21 could vote. Neither women, nor servants, nor individuals without known income were allowed to participate in the suffrage. The whole thing is at first a logistical mess. The French elect 749 representatives, but most of the time, a little over 300 show up at the meetings and votes. They elect a president among themselves to preside over the works of the assembly. That president is elected for only 2 weeks, so over 70 presidents will be elected between 1792 and 1795. The point was to prevent concentration of power in the hands of one man. They were making this up as they went, and mistakes were made, as we'll see. The First Republic had 3 major changes of governance. The first assembly was dominated by the Girondins, from the foundation of the Republic to June 1793. Following an insurrection in spring 1793, a new assembly is voted in, with the Montagnards or the Mountaineers at its head. It is during that period that the terror will happen, with the Committee of Public Safety, an organ of government created to protect the new republic against its foreign and domestic enemies. They will eventually suspend the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen to allow the committee to act as it saw fit. Many thousands will die under the guillotine during the purges that will follow, until the regime leaders, most famously Robespierre, will also die under the famed blade in July 1794. Finally, the Third Convention, formed after the fall of Robespierre, is known as the Thermidorian Convention, as the coup against Robespierre happened on Thermidor 9 of year 2 in the French Republican calendar, or July 27, 1794. As you have noted by now, the convention was struggling just to stay in power, being ousted once by an insurrection and then by an internal strife following a period of dictatorship and massive killings. Not a great start for the Republic, and certainly a far cry from the utopian society the revolutionaries had in mind in 1792. It was clear that the Republic needed stronger, better institutions. So, on August 22, 1795, the National Convention adopts a new constitution, the Constitution of Year 3, which reestablishes many liberties suspended during the Terror, but also distances itself from some core principles of the Revolution, such as natural law and universal rights. Citizens have rights and also duties, right in the Constitution. And to help maneuver all that, the functioning of the Republic is altered with the establishment of a system known as the Directorate. Instead of universal male suffrage, the Republic now works with a census suffrage, meaning that you have to be a homeowner to vote. This limits the vote to around 30,000 men. The convention also decides to divide itself to prevent more drama among the deputies. An upper house, the Council of the Elders, and a lower house, the Council of the 500. Instead of a president, the elders choose 5 directors, chosen from a list presented by the 500. Each year, one of the directors is replaced by somebody else. This prevents the establishment of a new organ like the Committee for Public Safety, as power, both legislative and executive, is spread and divided. Quick note, it is just before that, in July 1795, that the Marseillaise, written by Rouget de Lille for the Army of the Rhine, is adopted as the French national anthem. It is a revolutionary war anthem that calls for resistance against foreign invasion and urges patriotic mobilization. It also serves as an hymn to freedom and a rallying cry against tyranny. It will come and go depending on regimes, but since 1879 it is firmly entrenched as France's national anthem. At first, the Directorate seems to hold. The internal situation stabilizes, and France is winning victories on various military fronts. but it faces many challenges, including strong and growing royalist activities, discontent from revolutionaries' hardliners, and big corruption issues. Royalists try to topple the government by getting elected and taking over the republic, but they are outmaneuvered by the directors. On September 4, 1797, the directors, assisted by the army, lead a coup against the elected councils to arrest royalist members. It is known as the coup of 18 Fructidor, year 5. Following that, they greatly reinforce the executive power over the legislative. It does prevent the royalists from taking over, but it weakens the republican institutions. It also shows where the real power really is, with the army. The Directorate enters a downward spiral. It cannot stabilize the dire financial situation and starts suffering military defeats in 1798 and 1799. Seeing this, some men start conspiring to replace it with a more effective form of government, one that would be in the hands of less people, more efficient deciders and leaders. Director Sieyès works to change the constitution to reinforce the executive power of the Directory and to weaken the councils once and for all. Changing the constitution is technically possible, but it requires a unity that he cannot get. There is only one way out: a military coup. After some tergiversation, Sieyès thinks that the young General Napoleon Bonaparte could help him in this endeavor. Bonaparte agrees, and on November 9, 1799, or the 18 Brumaire in the Republican calendar, they successfully lead a coup to topple the government and to form a new republican order, the Consulate. The Directory is no more. Again, please listen to my dedicated episodes on the Revolution or Napoleon to get more details on all these major events. I have to skim a lot here, otherwise the episode will be 3 hours long. The Consulate is headed by 3 men: Bonaparte, Sieyès, and Ducos, a former member of the Council of the Elders. This system, inspired by classical Rome, will be the last one of the First French Republic. Napoleon Bonaparte becomes first consul following the Constitution of Year 8, promulgated in December 1799. Soon enough, he will wield all the real power in France. The Consulate does have institutions, namely the Conseil d'État or State Council, whose members are named by Napoleon and are here to help him write and implement laws. The Tribunat, with 100 deputies, discusses these laws and can adjust them if need be, without modifying them too much. The Corps Législatif, with 300 deputies, implements laws on the territory. Finally, the Sénat Conservateur, or Conservative Senate, chooses the deputies from both the Tribunat and the Corps Législatif. Its 60 members are chosen by Bonaparte. It's a complete circle. Bonaparte effectively has control over all branches of government. The Consulate is perceived as a golden age for France and the First Republic, despite the loss of democratic institutions. Following French military victories, a series of peace treaties are signed, culminating with the Treaty of Amiens of March 25, 1802, which even Great Britain signs. For the first time in 10 years, the cannons are quiet in Europe. Internally, many overdue reforms are implemented, but some aspects of the old regime are also brought back by Napoleon. Great advancements, like the Code Civil or the creation of the Banque de France, are brought forward, but women's rights are driven back to the 1789 status quo, and other liberties are suspended. In 1804, Napoleon signs a concordat with the papacy, working back on the Republic's secular core principles. In December 1804, Napoleon has himself crowned emperor, claiming that the Republic is, quote, entrusted to an emperor, end quote. He ends the charade that had been going on for 5 years and effectively reestablishes a monarchical dynastic regime. France won't have another republic for 44 years. France will continue on with the empire until 1814, then the Bourbon Restoration in 1814, then the Hundred Days, and another restoration in 1815. The monarchy will endure until 1830, when the French will revolt against the Bourbons once again, and the King of France will be replaced by a King of the French, the more moderate Louis-Philippe of the House of Orléans. This regime is known as the July Monarchy. The first years are promising, and France actually reestablishes its status as a major power in Europe. But troubles arise in the mid-1840s. The country is plagued by bad crops in 1845 and 46, followed by an economic crisis. It also induces a discontent against the institutions. The July Monarchy is a parliamentary regime, but there are only 240,000 voters in a country of over 35 million. It's a male census suffrage, which discriminates against a big portion of the population. And more French citizens are sick of it. They want to have a say in the affairs of their country. France actually suffers a very complex political crisis, alongside the economic one, with factions fighting for power. Monarchists, Republicans, moderates, all fight over the French institutions. In 1847, the political system is effectively paralyzed, and the king is unable to untangle it. In February 1848, the opposition organizes a political manifestation known as a banquet campaign to circumvent the interdiction of political reunions implemented earlier. They put together marches, with bands accompanying the crowds, then they meet over a feast to discuss the political situation. That feast is actually expensive to prevent poor people from getting in. They were reformers, but not that much. On February 23, 1848, Parisians revolt against the state. Barricades are put together, and the National Guard is summoned by the government. Citizens are killed by the soldiers following a misunderstanding, and the situation becomes impossible. Louis-Philippe has to abdicate the next day, forced by rioters who entered the palace of the Tuileries. He flees for England, asking for his grandson to be selected as the new king. The French won't have it. The government falls with the king, and the July Monarchy is no more. The Republicans, leaders of the insurrections, now see their chance. A provisory Republican government is formed and quickly proclaims that it will help the poor and workers. The industrial workers are especially targeted, as they are the fastest growing class in France and are the victims of the horrible capitalism of the 19th century. They echo the revolution of 1789, but they want to prevent a new reign of terror. They also abolish slavery for good and vow not to wage wars of conquest against other nations. On April 23, 1848, the French vote for a National Constituent Assembly to decide on a new constitution. It is a universal male suffrage, not a census one this time. When the results are calculated, the moderate Republicans have a clear majority. Alongside the left-wing socialist and right-wing members of the Parti de l'Ordre, they put together a constitution and proclaimed the Republic on November 4, 1848. This is a unique take on the French Republican regime. It is a Christian republic, proclaiming its principles, quote, in the presence of God and in the name of the French people, end quote. In this, it resembles the American Republic. It proclaims the freedom of the press, of worship and association and property. It also suppresses the death penalty for political crimes. The branches of power are also firmly separated. There is only one house, the National Legislative Assembly. The executive power is in the hands of the president, elected for 4 years, also by male universal suffrage. However, this president cannot be re-elected for a second term right away, to prevent a form of monarchical republic. Presidential elections are to be held in December 1848. A few men tried their luck. Eugène Cavaignac, a former general with lots of support, tries to seduce conservatives and moderates alike. Alexandre Ledru-Rollin represents the socialists and other left-wingers. Even the poet Lamartine puts his name down. But they will all be beaten by a man bearing a great name, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew. Despite having tried to take over the government in 1836 with a failed military coup, Bonaparte manages to present himself as the ideal candidate. The left is very divided, and the ultra-conservative scare the moderates. He is seen as both a champion of the people and a right-wing conservative, the, quote, Napoleon of the people, end quote. The monarchists and Catholics also support him, which is a great help. On December 11, 1848, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte becomes the first directly elected president of the French Republic, with 70% of the vote. It's a triumph. Once in place, Bonaparte works with the Parti de l'Ordre to establish a very conservative government with monarchical tendencies. They undermine the left-wing Republicans and actually work the Republican institutions against them. The legislative election of mid-1849 see the Conservatives win the majority, both in popular votes and in seats. The Socialists are the main opposition, and the moderates are a distant third. But the Conservatives don't care much about the opposition, and they govern as they see fit. The following couple of years are very tumultuous, including a French expedition in Rome, where the French army helped put the Pope back on his throne after being ousted by Roman Republicans. It is a complicated story, but it emphasizes the point that the French government under Bonaparte was much more attached to traditional values and Catholicism than to republicanism. On May 31, 1850, a law is voted to limit the number of electors. To vote, one has to prove having lived in the same commune or town for at least 3 years. In a moment, 30% of the electorate disappears. The goal is simple: to restrict the electorate and to prevent left-wing parties to appeal to the poor workers. It is denounced by many representatives, including the author Victor Hugo, who, despite being a member of the Parti de l'Ordre, says, quote, "This law subjects 3 million marginalized people to the rule of 6 million privileged individuals in a feudal manner. It creates a class of helots and a monstrous injustice." End quote. At the same time, the liberty of the press is limited by the government. By 1851, the Republic looks less and less like a democracy and more like an authoritarian monarchy in disguise. Bonaparte aims to stay in power, despite the constitution forbidding him from running for a second term. Hence, he does what his uncle did in 1799, a coup. He launches it on December 2nd, 1851, the anniversary of Napoleon's coronation and of the Battle of Austerlitz. With the army at his side and his minions at key roles in the government, Bonaparte takes over within a couple days. Following a plebiscite in late December, he has the French voters validate his coup. He then strong-arms the people and the press to support a change of regime in 1852. On November 7th, 1852, Bonaparte proposes the creation of a new empire, proclaiming that empire is peace. He organizes a new plebiscite on November 20th and has himself proclaimed Emperor Napoleon III on December 2nd, 1852. The Second Republic was no more, and France was now under the Second Empire regime. Napoleon III will rule as emperor until 1870, when the Franco-Prussian War happens. Following a disastrous military defeat at Sedan, a huge part of the French army surrenders, and the aging and ill emperor is captured by the Germans. In the midst of the crisis, Republicans in Paris see their chance. On September 4th, 1870, 2 days after the emperor's capture, Representatives Léon Gambetta and Jules Favre declare that the emperor is deposed and proclaim the formation of a new republic at the Paris City Hall. The rest of the major French cities joined this republican appeal in a matter of days. The whole of France turns a page of empire and monarchy. The Second Empire had been the last monarchical regime in the history of France. But this new republic is in a terrible situation. France is still at war with Prussia, and Paris is besieged. The representatives decide to form a government of national defense to pursue the war. Part of the government flees to Bordeaux, with Léon Gambetta famously escaping Paris in a balloon. But the Prussians are too well entrenched, and their army is too strong. On January 18, 1871, the German unification is proclaimed at the Château de Versailles. The new Reich had been created in France, rubbing it in. The Parisians are still besieged and are starving and living in terrible conditions. The government does not have a choice but to negotiate an armistice. It becomes effective on January 28th. The French organize elections hastily to have some form of legitimate government to negotiate with the Germans. The French vote for the members of a National Assembly with only one house, although this is clearly a temporary solution. Its goal is to negotiate the peace, stabilize the country, to then have favorable conditions to establish a proper constitution for a third republic. Funnily enough, the elected representatives are mostly monarchist, but they swallow the pill for the immediate good of the country. France needs a stable government to negotiate peace, and at the moment, that stability lies in a united republic. The French and the Germans sign a humiliating peace treaty for France at Versailles on February 21st. The French have to pay 5 billion francs, about 3 times the French GNP at the time. They have to cede most of Alsace and Moselle to the German Reich. Despite the opposition of the representatives from Alsace and Lorraine, the National Assembly ratifies it on March 1st. The war has ended, and France is disgraced and weakened. The Parisians firmly oppose this treaty. Many of them see it as a treason, especially given the suffering they've been enduring for months. In their eyes, it had all been for nothing. The French government acts first by taking guns located in Montmartre. Riots ensue. 2 generals are killed, and the rioters stand firm. On March 26, they elect a general council of the Commune. A bloody standoff follows, in April and in May. During the week of May 21st, the French government sends in the troops in what is known as the Bloody Week. Around 900 soldiers die, alongside over 10,000 communards, the French rebels. The French Republic had been born out of a terrible military defeat, and its first major act was to crush a rebellion in blood. Not the best start for a new regime. The National Assembly had to choose one man as head of the executive branch of the French Republic, a quasi-temporary dictator. That man is Adolphe Thiers, a conservative. He first strives to pay off the war reparations as quickly as possible, since France remains under German occupation until they are fully paid. The French managed to pay the Germans off in 1873 by contracting many debts. While Thiers is working on stabilizing the country, monarchists plot to overthrow the newborn republic in favor of a new monarchy. But they cannot unite or even agree on who should be king. This serves the republic, and in 1872, Adolphe Thiers proclaims, quote, "The republic exists, it is the legal government of the country. wanting something else would be a new revolution and the most formidable of all. End quote. The representatives then start working on establishing strong bases for the new republic. Having learned from the failure of the Second Republic, it is decided that the President of the Republic should have less powers and that it should be a parliamentary regime with two houses, the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate. The constitutional laws are voted in February 1875, establishing the new workings of the Republic. The real power lies in the National Assembly and the head of the government, the President of the Council of Ministers. They are elected by universal male suffrage. The President is elected for 7 years by the National Assembly, the combination of both houses. He enacts the laws, can pardon criminals, can nominate some members of government, and he can dissolve the National Assembly if the political situation requires it. But he is far from being as powerful as he was during the Second Republic, to prevent a new coup à la Bonaparte. After a few years, the Republic becomes more progressive, notably under the influence of Jules Ferry, a representative, minister, and eventually President of the Council in 1883. France modernizes very quickly in the 1880s. School is made free, mandatory, and secular, the famed Republican school. Laws are passed to entrench the liberty of the press and of expression in France. Unions are legalized. The country is becoming more and more politically liberal, despite being morally quite conservative. It is also in 1879 that the Marseillaise is firmly established as France's national anthem, anchoring the Republic in its revolutionary roots. If you have not done it already, I encourage you to find and read the lyrics of the Marseillaise. They are, let's say, interesting. A perfect example of the dichotomy between conservatism and liberalism in France is the Dreyfus affair. I have covered it in full in a dedicated episode in December 2023, but the gist of it is this. In October 1894, a Jewish French artillery officer is wrongly accused of treason. He is victim of a conspiracy amongst the military and part of the Republic. Over the next 12 years, the country will be divided into supporters and adversaries of Dreyfus. It is a deep crisis that sheds a lot of light on French social and moral issues of the time. In the end, Dreyfus will be pardoned and reinstated in 1906, but he will have spent years as a prisoner in the Bagne of Cayenne. This affair had two effects on religion. It exacerbated anti-Semitism from Catholic conservatives, but also anti-clericalism from socialists and other left-wingers. As time went by, a proper separation of the state and the church looked more and more reasonable, despite the immense majority of France's population being Catholic. In 1902, a firmly left-wing government is elected, and they start to work on new laws to that effect. France's religious affairs were still under the 1802 Concordat, established between Napoleon and the papacy. But following a major crisis between France and the Vatican in 1904, the Concordat was effectively dead. A commission is formed under Representatives Ferdinand Buisson and Aristide Briand. And in 1905, their report proposes a, quote, loyal and complete separation of churches and state, end quote. The law is promulgated in December 1905. It ensures the liberty of cult for everyone, but also firmly separates the state from the church. The ministers, priests, rabbis, bishops, etc., are no longer paid by the state, but some buildings owned by the state are given back to various churches. If the French people was first divided on the question of secularism, it soon enough became a hallmark of French republicanism. Religion was still a major part of French life, but not anymore part of government or national education. To this day, the French are still very attached to these principles. The Third Republic was blessed in the late 19th century and early 20th century by a period of economic growth, despite some drawbacks, and enormous scientific and technological advancements. Also, just like their great rivals, the British, the French hugely expanded their colonial possessions during that period. With the scramble for Africa and the division of the continent in 1884 during the Berlin Conference, and the conquest of Indochina during the 1880s and 1890s, France was once again a major international power, only really rivaled by Great Britain and Germany, with the United States still a bit distant. The Third Republic was enjoying greater stability than any French government since the monarchy. In 1910, it was entering its fifth decade, and its core principles and institutions seemed very solid. Despite the major economical and social changes that happened in France, there was not a big current of opinion against the Republic itself. Sure, you could still find monarchists in France, or the occasional rebel hardline Republican, unhappy with the relatively moderate approach of the French government. But overall, the French Republic was enjoying a great stability, and the French people saw their quality of life improve over the years. France was also a major center for arts, literature, and sciences. Paris was considered the cultural capital of Europe. With their colonial empire, the French considered themselves warriors engaged in a civilizing mission on various continents. Although this was not the case, the French were exploiting the resources and people from their colonies through coercion. This made the French very proud and contributed to France's international standing. That is the world France lived in at the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914. I'll let you listen to my episode of February 2024 to learn more about the French experience during the war. But basically, the French Republic survived it, which is almost a miracle, especially considering the scale of destruction and death that occurred on French soil. The French had suffered 1.7 million killed, 300,000 of them civilians. 4.3 million Frenchmen were wounded, half of them incapacitated for life. These numbers are enormous. Over 10% of the entire French population had been killed or wounded in the war. France as a nation was deeply hurt, but its government stayed the course. During the war, it mostly presented a united front to guide the country. After 1919, all bets were off. In the 1920s, France is a country traumatized by the war. While the government tries to show strength in France and abroad, the people are done with war and sacrifices. They have suffered too much and make that known to their leaders. The Roaring Twenties helped France recover economically, but the crash of 1929 catches up with France in the early 30s. Industries collapse, living standards decrease, many find themselves without homes or jobs. France is becoming more and more divided between extreme right politics and left-wing ones, just like many other European countries. Despite right-wing riots in February 1934, the Third Republic does not fall into fascism of some sort, contrary to Italy and Germany. By then, the Republican institutions in France are very solid, and most French actually want to uphold what it represents. In 1936, a left-wing coalition government known as the Front Populaire is elected. It will work to improve the lives of the average French person. It will reduce the work week to 40 hours. It will introduce annual leave in France. It will nationalize key industries like the train network with the creation of the SNCF. Despite the hardships and the frequent changes of government, with no party managing to gain a majority, the Republic holds on. It is shaken, but it is solid. It would take a catastrophe for it to crumble. That catastrophe will be delivered once again by Germany. I encourage you to listen to my episode on the fall of France of 1940 to learn all the details. But the point here is that following the crushing military defeat against Germany in May-June 1940, the French government calls on old Marshal Pétain to head them in the crisis. On July 10, 1940, the National Assembly meets at Vichy and votes for giving full powers to Marshal Pétain. This vote effectively kills the Republic and creates a new authoritarian regime that will be known as the Vichy regime. It will collaborate with Germany during the war, and its leaders will be judged after their liberation. I intend to cover this very troubled period of French history in a future episode. From 1944 to 1946, France is governed by a provisional government of the French Republic, first headed by Charles de Gaulle, then by other French politicians, including Léon Blum, the Jewish French president of the Council, who had done so much for the workers in the government of the Front Populaire. He had been deported to Buchenwald during the war, survived, and came back to serve in the government. Quite the civil servant. By the way, French women had finally been given the right to vote in 1944 by the French Committee of National Liberation, the precursor of the provisional government. Extremely late, if you ask me, but French elections were finally truly universal. Many Frenchmen, especially Charles de Gaulle, considered the Third Republic's institutions to be partially responsible for the collapse of 1940. They believed that the indecisiveness of the various governments prevented France from having a coherent and strong answer to what was happening on the other side of the Rhine River. So, they decide through a referendum in 1945 to not simply re-establish the Third Republic, but to create a national constitutional assembly to create a new republic. De Gaulle will clash with the various political parties and will leave in early 1946, not taking part in the actual creation of that republic. The constitution is approved by the French people in October 1946. This Fourth Republic does resemble the Third, as it is a parliamentary regime where the president is more of a figurehead. The president of the Council is the head of the government and is the strongest political figure in the country. However, contrary to the Third Republic, the two houses are not at the same political level. The upper house, the Conseil de la République, is a consultative body, chosen by an electoral college. The lower house, the National Assembly, is elected by direct and universal suffrage and exercises the real power. It controls the government and can censure it with a majority vote. The President of the Republic nominates the President of the Council, but he has to be approved by an absolute majority of the National Assembly. This new regime has to deal with rebuilding France after the Second World War. Not a small task. I do have to say that they made the most of the American Marshall Plan, that great financial aid given to European countries after the war. France was really quick to rebuild its cities, industries, and to start thriving and innovating again. The Americans were hoping that this would strengthen their allies in the West and would prevent communism from rising. Keep in mind that in 1947, the French Communist Party was the strongest party in France, with over 25% of the vote. Not surprising, given the very important role of communists to fight the Nazis during the war. But, in an emerging Cold War context, they were now seen as the enemy. The French establishment agreed with that view and did everything in their power to prevent communists from becoming too important in the government, despite their popular support. In the end, the Fourth Republic would be undone by what helped the Third to thrive for decades: colonialism. After the war, many colonies rebelled against their European overlords, and wars erupted everywhere. The French had a different approach to colonialism than the British. For the British, it was a very commercial relationship. They imposed their power, drained the country of its resources, and made a profit out of it. The French did that too, but they also wanted to make their colonial subjects French citizens. They transformed cities in Algeria, Gabon, or Vietnam into copies of French towns. They imposed French culture everywhere. They established schools to make the locals learn French language and history. The colonial people were encouraged to over-French the French. And indeed, many of them became very attached to France and its culture over decades of colonial occupation and brainwashing. However, when liberation and independence movements launched in the late 1940s and early 1950s, it made the separation all the more difficult. French colonial wars proved longer and more brutal than those of other colonial powers. By losing their colonies, the French felt they were losing part of themselves. In the case of Algeria, they considered it a French département, actual French soil. To let it go was unthinkable to many Frenchmen and women. That situation proved untenable for the French Fourth Republic. It barely managed to survive the Indochina War by handing the problem to the Americans in 1954, but the regime was badly shaken by it. Algeria, however, would prove to be too much. By 1956, over 1 million people of French origin lived in Algeria. These are the famous pieds noirs, the black feet. Many of them had been there for generations and considered it their land as well as part of France. But the Algerian Front of National Liberation had other ideas. Its members wanted to get rid of the French entirely, and it's not surprising. The Algerian Muslims, the vast majority of the population, were treated as second-rate citizens by the French. The Algeria War was a terrible, terrible affair, with massacres, destruction, and a refusal of the French authority to see things as they were. From then on, the governments of the Fourth Republic succeed one another at an alarming rate. The French people are divided on what to do with Algeria. Some feel that a civil war is looming. Following manifestations, de Gaulle is recalled by the French authorities on June 1, 1958. He is made president of the Council with a clear mandate to solve the French political crisis and the Algerian War. He will do both, albeit not as initially intended. Following de Gaulle's comeback, the National Assembly votes for a revision of the Constitution. In the end, a whole new constitution, much more in the line with de Gaulle's views, is showed to the French people, who vote to adopt it by referendum on September 28, 1958. A key aspect of this new republic is the figure of its president. He is now elected for 7 years through direct universal suffrage, as de Gaulle considered that no electoral college or house could claim to have the same level of legitimacy. It won't be done immediately, as de Gaulle will be elected in 1958 by an electoral college, but from 1965 on, all French presidents will be elected directly by the people. The president is also far more powerful than before. He is an arbiter of power. He chooses the prime minister, the head of government, although the National Assembly has to support this choice. He is the head of the army, he can veto laws, he represents France abroad, etc. He becomes much more present in French daily life. That is why many observers consider the Fifth Republic to be a presidential republic, in opposition with the parliamentary republics that preceded it. Some even call it a republican monarchy, as the French president has more authority than in most other democratic republics. This new republic is based on the concept of majority. If the president is not elected on the first round with over 50% of the vote, a second round is organized 2 weeks after, with only the two leading candidates, ensuring that the president is elected by a majority of voters at this point. The government is elected in the same way. Voters vote for legislative elections, and in each circumscription where nobody won a majority, a second round is organized, although it can have more than two candidates. The idea is that the elected assembly will enjoy a majority of seats, allowing the government to work in relative ease. Most of the time, French voters vote for the president's party in the following legislative elections, giving the president and his government free rein over France. But a few times, like in 1986, 1993, or 1997, that was not the case. In the late 80s, the socialist president François Mitterrand had to work with the right-wing Prime Minister Jacques Chirac. Since his party won the majority during the elections, Mitterrand had no choice but to appoint Chirac Prime Minister. These situations are called cohabitation and are sometimes difficult to work with. In the year 2000, President Jacques Chirac reduced the presidential term from 7 to 5 years, just like the legislative term, to diminish the risk of cohabitation. In the latest French legislative elections of June-July 2024, despite this system, no clear majority emerged from the vote, for the first time in the Fifth Republic. As I said, the French president can choose anyone as prime minister, but the Assemblée nationale can vote a motion de censure and make his government fall. President Macron then had to choose someone who could work with a majority of French parties, from the left-wing Nouveau Front Populaire to the extreme right Rassemblement National. No easy task, and the outcome is still not clear. Some are even saying that the inflexibility of the institutions, the lack of coalition culture in modern French politics, could lead to constitutional changes, even the creation of a sixth republic. I guess we'll see. Nevertheless, the Fifth Republic has been fairly stable since its inception in 1958. Under this regime, France has modernized itself on many fronts. Abortion was legalized in 1975, thanks to Representative Simone Veil. The death penalty was abolished in 1981, and yes, it was still carried out by guillotine until that point. Homosexuality was decriminalized in 1982. The European Union progressed tremendously too, in good part thanks to French leadership and their partnership with their former enemies, Germany. Some of these social progresses had been a very long time coming, but they did come. They are part of modern French society. Despite the Fifth French Republic currently facing a new political crisis, it has achieved a level of stability and effectiveness that its predecessors could never fully attain. Quite the feat for a nation as complex, combative, and rebellious as France. France is a republic. The French are republicans. In France, when a politician ends a speech, they say Vive la République et vive la France, or Long live the Republic and long live France. Over the last century and a half, the two have become inseparable. Despite their long monarchical or even imperial heritage, the French are hardcore republicans in their vast majority. As you now understand, the French Republic has meant many things over the years, from the revolutionary government that toppled a millennia-old monarchy, to the corrupt and self-serving Second Republic, to the parliamentary and complex Third and Fourth Republics, and finally, to the presidential Fifth Republic, governing France to this day. If America has had many amendments to its constitution, France has had many changes of governing regimes, partly following major internal strifes, partly following wars. In fact, wars on French soil have always ended up in new political regimes since 1814, except for the First World War. The Republic is both a political system and an idea, one constantly evolving, just like the country it serves. It is a system, as it has institutions, and is, by its nature, democratic. It is the public matter, as I have said. It is meant to serve the public. That means both the people and the country they live in. It's not a monarchy. People are citizens, not subjects. The moment it becomes too autocratic, it is no longer a republic. It goes against the very definition of what a republic is. Nobody can be born president or prime minister. It has allowed people from very different backgrounds to reach the highest power in France, both at the Palace of the Élysée, the residence of the French president, and at the Hôtel de Matignon, the prime minister's residence. The French Republic is also deeply secular. According to recent polls, over 51% of French citizens do not have any religious affiliation. This is way more than in most countries on earth. Secularism is indeed very, very strongly implemented in French culture and values. I hope this overview of the 5 French republics will help shed some light on a complex situation, one that is usually not understood at all outside French borders. Since 1792, the French Republic has gone from revolution to evolution, and it shall continue to evolve. Thank you for listening. Au revoir. You can find the Lafayette We Are Here podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or on LafayettePodcast.com. If you enjoy the show, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Lafayette Podcast. You can also reach me on social media or by email. All the links are on the website. The music for this podcast is the Marche pour la cérémonie des Turcs, composed by Jean-Baptiste Lully, arranged and performed by Jérôme Arfouche.